wanna stay ahead of the curve, then follow my words. All we doing, teach, train, innovate, solve, yeah. Teach, train, innovate, solve. If you wanna be ahead of the curve, then follow my words.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, everyone, to TTIS, where we build confidence, empowered educators, giving you practical tools that you can use today. I want to welcome you back. If you're preparing for the SPED 186 exam, or you're working in special education, or simply trying to become a stronger educator, tonight's conversation matters because traumatic brain injury, also known as TBI, is one of those eligible categories, the 13 that we've been talking about, that educators often recognize at very surface level. But you've got to know much deeper when you're applying the information to this exam. And that's really the key in your thinking. This exam is not surface level, but it is asking you, what do you do when you recognize the disability? And that really is what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to walk through a few things on our agenda in hopes of helping you as you prepare to pass your exam. And the first thing is what TBI actually is. I'm not going to give you my thoughts, but I'm going to give you what IDEA says about TBI and how it defines it. The next thing we're going to talk about is how it impacts learning and behavior, and what instructional mistakes some educators commonly make, and then what effective support actually looks like. And I always make certain that lately that I insert a question in and then walk you through a potential question. That's where we're going to lay our head tonight, hoping that it will continue to help you to progress in your understanding of this exam. So let's go back to the question I started with. What do you do when you recognize this particular disability? And I made it general, the question general, because it could apply to any of the 13, even though we're specifying TBI tonight. And if you're new here to our station, I'm Tamara Gibson, the owner of TT Innovative Solution, and this channel really is dedicated to helping teachers move beyond the memorization and into strategic decision-making, because your classroom is going to matter. And this exam is the first stepping stone. So what is TBI? Well, let's start with a really quick definition of mine, and then a definition, as you see on your screen, offered by IDEA. Mine, a traumatic brain injury, is an acquired injury to the brain caused by some external force, physical force of some kind, either a car accident, most of the time fall, sports injuries, unfortunately, physical assaults, military injuries, and blows to the head. Now, IDEA goes even deeper in section 300.8 to define it as a brain injury, meaning acquired or caused by the external force, resulting in total or partial functional disability, or psychosocial impairment, or a combination of both. That's what it means. And then it also gives a definition of what does not apply. And that's important as well, as you understand and learn the various categories in their extent. We do have a link that goes with all of the definitions of the 13 categories that we'd love to share with you. Go ahead and join our mailing list that you can find on ttinnovates.com, and we'll be sure to give you that particular link. So let's continue on talking about some of the very important things that you'll notice with students that have this particular disability. They might appear to be developmentally typical before the injury. That matters because most teachers sometimes expect students to go back to how they previously performed. But a TBI can affect several things like memory, attention, their processing speed, most definitely is executive functioning, which we talk a lot about on the station, emotional regulation, and a list of other things that definitely can cause the student to not function or go back to what they might have been prior to this brain injury. And these impacts may not always be visible. So that's one of the reasons that TBI can sometimes be misunderstood in schools. A student may appear capable verbally, but struggle tremendously with things like organization, initiation of activities, and even follow through. So on an exam, I want you to be very careful not to assume if the student can talk well, they are functionally well academically. That's one of the traps that I want to highlight tonight. Then I want to go a little bit further. What makes TBI different than the other categories? Well, the student with TBI may be able to perform well one day, but then the next day it's a struggle. Remembering information in one setting and then forgetting another one. Maybe even complete part of a task independently, but become cognitively overloaded halfway through that assignment. This inconsistency is often tied to their cognitive fatigue. The way that they can retrieve or remember things might be difficult, and then sensory overload. If you are seeing phrases like difficult sustaining attention, slow processing, emotional outbursts after frustration, you should immediately begin thinking, could this reflect the executive functioning difficulties associated with TBI? But I want you to be cautious because there are some things that we commonly see as mistakes when I'm helping educators prepare. And some of those common things are because SPED 186 loves distractors. I talk about that when I talk about the dangling carrot that's waved in front of you. It sounds good. It even most of the time is logical, but it does not answer the actual question. So although it might sound supportive, it fails to address the real need. And that's the first mistake. Assuming that repetition alone solves the problem. Some teachers think, I'll just repeat the directions enough times that the student will get it. But repetition without structure and often ineffective for students with TBI. You might say, why? Because the issue may not be hearing the information. The issue might be working memory, processing speed, as I mentioned before, and cognitive organization. So the supports needs to be reduce their cognitive load. That's one of the ways in which you can look within the multiple choice questions to seek your answer. Another mistake is viewing the student as unmotivated. Students with TBI are sometimes mislabeled because they're thought of as being lazy or defiant or simply careless or unmotivated. But these challenges can make task initiation extremely difficult because we're talking about a cognitive change for them. So the student may want to complete the work, but struggle with getting things organized or even getting started with the task. Maybe even prioritizing the steps in which they need to complete the task. And SPED 186 exam wants you to recognize the difference between behavior and neurological impact. So be careful with those type of questions. And then my third one, overloading the student. Sometimes we provide too long of verbal directions, too many steps at one time, and clutter around the assignment. This is only going to frustrate them even more. It's only going to make it harder for them to be able to complete the task that you're asking them to complete. And students with TBI benefit from best practice strategies like chunking, visual supports, and simplified presentations. If I keep a structured routine and I give guided practice, they're more likely going to be successful. And so that leads me into some best practices that I believe are important for instruction for them. And these often allow them the opportunity to have the support they need in order to do well at the exam. These moves are what teachers should do. This is where your answer choices will begin to separate when you're looking for things that will actually help. So I'll go back to the first one, which is chunk information. Break the assignment into manageable sections. Instead of saying complete this entire packet, let's complete questions 1, 2, 3 first. Sounds simple, right? But it will help students that have TBI. Because chunking reduces overwhelm and it supports working memory. Another one is the visual supports that I mentioned before. Visual schedules, graphic organizers that you, of course, train them how to use. Even checklists. These are all things that could help. Color coding, step-by-step models. These support our students with TBI, and they begin to benefit with external organizational systems because their internal organization may be impaired. And then another one, the one that I see often in all of the Texas exam prep manuals, explicit instruction. You cannot assume that students automatically understand. They need help with organization, help with planning, note-taking, and self-monitoring. These often require you to teach them directly. That looks like you modeling through your actual actions. Also, think aloud, guided practice, and then giving them very clear feedback. The last of the ones that I want to, and there are a lot more that I could mention, is providing processing times. I know that it's fast-paced in the class, and there's tons of things that we have to get done. But one of those things that will help students with TBI is needing additional time. Time to process the language and the understanding of the information you're giving to them, to organize their thoughts, and even sometimes to be able to retrieve information when you're asking questions or you're asking them to complete something, either in a group or on their own. And this exam is probably going to present distractors where the teacher has something that they need done rapidly, redirects or pressures the students. Those are usually not the best answers. There's a few other things like building predictable routines and monitoring their cognitive fatigue. These are all very huge, and they're all very helpful. They're just a few of the best practices that can help with students with TBI. And lastly, I want to talk to you about the social and emotional considerations. Because TBI is not only academic. I'll say that again. It is not only about academics. These students may experience frustration because they're trying to retrieve information. They might even struggle with depression, impulsive behaviors, emotional outbursts, and then social misunderstandings. And they become emotional quickly because the injury impacts their ability to self-regulate. That means that you as a teacher have to use calm redirections. You have to provide the emotional support that they need and avoid escalating confrontations. So behavior is communication, and it's going to be evident as they ask questions to you on the SPED 186 exam. So now I want to take this conversation, these theories that I'm saying to you, the information that I know will impact and help you to pass this exam, and I want to put it into a Pearson style question. Because again, sometimes they don't ask us stuff directly. They ask us indirectly. And they might not even say that the student has TBI. They'll probably give descriptors, something about attention difficulties, memory deficits, and slow processing, and then a list of other ones. But your job is to determine what support best matches the need. That's why I keep saying the framework. You have to recognize the data. You have to understand the need and then choose the correct action that goes along with the need. Not choosing the label and then some random strategy, but really focusing on the data, the need, and the action. That's where you're going to be successful. So here is an example for us to walk through. A 7th grade student who recently returned to school following a traumatic brain injury demonstrates difficulty completing multi-step assignments independently. The student often forgets directions, loses materials, and becomes overwhelmed during lengthy classroom tasks. What instructional strategy would best support the student's academic functioning? Now let's take a look at those STEM choices. The distractors are there waiting for us to pick them, but I want to help us not to do so. A says providing the student with extended independent practice opportunities to increase task stamina. B, breaking assignments into smaller sections and providing visual checklists for task completion. Or maybe it's C, encouraging peer competition activities to improve the student's motivation and engagement. And then finally, D, reducing instructional supports to increase the student's independence over time. Now remember, they gave us data. 7th grade student returned with a traumatic brain injury, is having issues with multi-step assignments independently. They're forgetting things, they're losing things, they're overwhelmed. What best strategy is going to make sense? I hope that you chose B, because of the data that I just reminded you of. All of those point toward an executive functioning and working memory difficulty, commonly associated with TBI. So the best supports are going to reduce that cognitive load. Things like chunking, visual organization, and structured support system. That's why B is the most appropriate answer for this particular question. A talks about independent practice. It doesn't address the issue. C talks about motivation. It said nothing in the data about being motivated. And then D talks about removing support. Why would I do that when frustration is only going to set in and cause a student to fail at the activity? We have to be mindful of these types of things. Again, students with TBI often require scaffold independence, not abrupt withdrawal of support. And those are all what I like to say, my walkthrough of question stems, just to help you to understand how it works. I'm going to walk through another question through our SPED community, and I'd love for you to join us there and be able to walk you through another two sets of questions that I walked through this week and drop that information within our community. I'll leave all of the details for you to be able to join us, but tonight's session, really, I wanted to shift your thinking around TBI. And there's a few things that I want you to remember. Number one, SPED 186 is constantly asking you what barrier is interfering with access and participation for the student. And you have to identify the barrier. You have to make sure that your instructional decision directly connects to the need. That's how strong teachers think through this exam. It's also how strong test takers think. And that's what I'm trying to build within you. Not only the material, the content, the understanding, but the ability to attack this exam properly. I hope that you found value in tonight's session. I would love it if you would subscribe to our channel. We are few subscribers away from our next marker, as I've shared earlier in this episode. Share with another educator that's trying to pass this exam or just simply needs help with their understanding of special education. As a new teacher, I spent too much time trying to figure it out on my own. So it is my pleasure to be able to help those who are trying to get to their goal. Because understanding the categories alone, that's just the beginning. But knowing what to do instructionally, that's where the real work begins. It is where we're going to definitely understand. I also want to invite you out to an upcoming event that we have coming up on May 30th. It is our Writers Workshop. I'm going to leave some information down in the notes for you to join us. I've talked to you many times about our other supports, our blueprints session, our current classes, which we are on class number 3 this week. We'd love for you to join us. It's not classes that are stacked onto each other, but they are definitely connected. I am grateful that you have arrived here. You've landed in this space. And I hope that the provisions that we provided, the help that we're giving, is getting you closer to your goal. It is my pleasure to continue to serve. And I'll see you again next Monday at 7 p.m. with more information. This whole month is about the 13 categories. I'll pick another one. And if you want to know more about a particular one, drop a comment. I may just center around that one. All right, everyone, have a good evening, and I'll see you again real soon.